Are you a perfectionist who is raising a PDA child or teen? If the answer is yes, this short training is for you. So today we're going to talk about 4 things. We're going to talk about the logic of decision making as a parent who is raising at least one or more PDA children or teens, why you're a perfectionist, and even if you weren't before, why parenting a PDA child will turn you into a perfectionist and the logic behind that. Third, the logic of why we don't have to be perfect or get into black and white thinking and still make a lot of progress to help our children thrive over the long term. And I will end with 4, which is examples of how we can access this nuance or gray space and drop some of the perfectionism. Okay? So I'm going to start with a story and then we're going to go into those 4 topics. So like many of you, when I first started struggling with my son explicitly, as his behavior started to escalate, as he started to drop eating, as he started to go into sort of a feral animal mode, I went into perfectionism in behavioral approaches with him. So I followed all the rules and instructions of the books like 1, 2, 3 Magic, Positive Discipline, the suggestions of the pediatrician, the logic of parenting classes of like, you need to be more consistent, strict, follow through, really not ever being flexible. Okay, so I was very perfectionist about that, and I couldn't understand why what was suggested by professionals was not helping. Then when I started to learn about PDA, which was about 4 years ago, but the logic of dropping behaviorism was 5 years ago, I started to get really perfectionist about that too. I realized, okay, we got to lower demands, we have to provide our autonomy, we need to have accommodations. And I went into an extreme where I was like, oh my gosh, we can't have any rules, we can't have any boundaries, we can never activate his threat response because I had caused him trauma by the other approach, okay? So I had that desire to leverage all of my like type A perfectionism to make him heal and support him, right? And this is a pattern I see a lot of parents get into when they first move into the new paradigm of dropping demands, providing autonomy and equality, and working through a nervous system based or accommodation lens for their PDA child or teen. What this looks like is, and I understand that there are some circumstances where your child is so burned out or it's such an extreme case where you can't actually set boundaries safely in some circumstances. But a lot of times when we first start this and we understand what it means to support a PDA, or we go into the like, okay, we'd have no bedtime. They can eat whatever they want. We're never going to stop any behaviors. And we go into the other side of the pendulum, which is the perfectionism. Okay, so today we're going to talk about that. This is still something I struggle with because I had such a harrowing experience with my son that was largely caused by my doubling down on strict parenting, that fear comes up in me whenever I am activating his threat response, exposing him to something that's difficult, or pushing him through a demand. Right? And obviously my prioritization and decision making is way different. But for example, my husband is much better at this, of locating like what can he tolerate, and we're going to support him through it. Whereas my default is always to lower the demand because I'm so afraid of activating him because of that history. Okay, so let's start with why we get into this and sort of the one black and white thing about parenting and caregiving for a PDA child or teen. So what we know about the PDA brain is that there really isn't a yellow zone, or what I would call like the amping up to going into the survival brain. right? It's sort of like there are these two parts of the brain that our children and teens go into, and there's not a lot of space of the yellow zone, if you know anything about zones of regulation. It's simply, are they in the survival brain where they can't access learning, empathy, connection, and their neuroception, the subconscious perception of threat? Am I safe? Am I in danger? Is it life threat? Is going on a level that is faster than the frontal lobe or the thinking part of the brain. And so they might not even be aware of why their nervous system is getting set off. So what we know is that with a PDA child, whenever there is the neuroception, and that's from polyvagal theory, Dr. Stephen Porges, the neuroception, the subconscious registering of threat based on, are they neurocepting a loss of autonomy, freedom and choice, equality to you or someone or something around, right? Are they feeling below a sibling? Are they feeling below you? If so, that's going to set off that survival brain, and it's going to tell the nervous system to go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or collapse. Okay? And that is not under their conscious control. So this, given what we know about the brain and the nervous system of your PDAer, as a parent, that introduces a constraint or a limit that all of us share, which is every decision we make and every interaction with our child, we're choosing between only two options, which is we're either activating the nervous system or we're accommodating the nervous system. There isn't an in-between, okay? And when parents start to wrap their mind around this, and I will speak from experience that I also felt this, there's a lot of grief and rage and sort of bewilderment, because you're like, how can this be true that I only have these two choices? And every time I choose not to lower the demand, or, every time I set a limit or say no or stop them from hitting their sibling or say you can't eat that 10th piece of candy before dinner, it will set off a nervous system response, which over either in the moment or over the long term can impact access to basic needs like hygiene, toileting, sleep, safety, and or eating. So this is a harrowing choice point that we face as parents, and it's something that is very hard for other people to understand, and it's also hard for us to continually radically accept, because we don't want it to be true. We don't want to have to choose between stopping violence towards a sibling and whether or not our PDA will be able to sleep at night, right? But those are the trade-offs that we're making. So we are entering into this new way of parenting our children already in like a black and white situation. So of course, it's going to amplify your perfectionism, and it's going to put parents who weren't perfectionists into that mode of perfectionism, because it's like you only have these two choices, right? And additionally, when your nervous system is activated, or when your survival brain is perceiving that you're not safe, which is what's happening when you're watching your child have a nervous system response, your body is responding to the fact that your child's body or teen's body is responding as if there's a lion in front of them or if they're in physical mortal danger. So of course your nervous system is going to activate, right? When we go into fight or flight or even freeze, what's going to happen is that, and this is evolutionary, right? This is how we're designed as humans to stay alive on the savannah when there's, all the way from when there's like woolly mammoths, is to, when our nervous system perceives like I am in danger or I might die, we all of a sudden have tunnel vision, right? And you can even see this with pupils dilating and like locking into the problem at hand. You're not in a position when you are on the savannah and there's a woolly mammoth to be thinking about creative solutions, or what if I did this thing outside of the box, or maybe I could try something new, right? Like your nervous system is like hone in, focus on the problem, tune everything else out. Metabolism it speeds up, cortisol and adrenaline are going. You may need to like vomit or pee or poop and have diarrhea because you're getting rid of excess fluids, right? In order to fight flight. Or maybe you're frozen, so you have that mobilization, but you're also like not able to move. Okay, so when you are in that situation, which is continual, if you have a PDA or especially if they're externalized, if you're hearing screaming, if you are seeing violence, if you're seeing the facial expressions and movements of your child or teen that indicate they're in danger, you're going to have a nervous system response, okay? We get that tunnel vision, we get that black and white thinking, okay? And this might be exacerbated by two things, or both. You might be neurodivergent yourself, so you have a tendency to black and white thinking, or you might have been raised by an undiagnosed neurodivergent human and you were always monitoring, hypervigilant to their nervous system state, and perfectionism was one of your survival mechanisms, okay? So parents that I work with are very prone to this, and I'm including myself in this description. Okay, so what happens when we're in black and white thinking? We go to extremes, right? We're like, okay, lowering demands helps our PDA kids, so we're going to have no demands. Or, you know, if I set a limit, it's going to activate the threat response of my child, so I'm going to have no limits or no boundaries, right? And sometimes when we're first starting to shift our parenting and when our child or teen is in severe burnout, we do need to err on the side of lowering demands, really prioritizing what our boundaries and limits are. And this looks very different than traditional parenting. However, we don't want to stay in this like black and white thinking, because that's not where we can get creative and problem solve and find the nuance and the middle way, which is how this is going to be sustainable for a like family system. Okay. Now I want to talk about the logic of why we don't have to be perfectionists. And this is good news, right? So we have this first black or white decision point. We're either activating or accommodating our child, and that feels very constraining and scary. But the logic of the nervous system, this is from the trauma literature, polyvagal theory, but also what we know about PDAers, is that it's about cumulative nervous system activation over time and understanding the threshold of tolerance. So what do I mean by that? Often when we're thinking about behavior, we're thinking about like, okay, they started screaming, so what happened right before? Was there a loud sound? Did I say something wrong? Was there a word that triggered them? When they tip over their threshold, it's often a tipping point, right? So every interaction where they're activated could be from previous in the week and have nothing to do with that loud sound. That's just the tipping point. So for example, if they're going to school during the week and they're going to school and they're masking and they're internalizing their nervous system getting activated because, you know, they have to stand in line, they have to do circle time. If they're older, you know, they have to start and stop classes at a certain time. There are social dynamics where they can't have full autonomy or be equal to or above their peers always. Their peers might be faster than they are or get better grades than they are or whatever it is. And so this is going to be building always in their system, right? And so when they get home to a safe space and perceive safety with you, the safest of the safe, that's when the tipping point puts them over what they can tolerate as a human for how much their nervous system activates before they pass that threshold and go into full-on fight, flight, or equalizing behavior, which is like controlling and manipulating and like can be really distressing to receive as a parent or a sibling or anyone for that matter. So if everything is cumulative, right? If this is a cumulative logic, that's good news, because what we can understand is that if we're looking at, for example, a water bottle, we have all these drops in the bucket of activation. Those are the moments of activation. And then we have other moments of accommodation. All the activation is pushing us up towards the top of the water bottle. And all the accommodation is bringing the child or teen back down from the point when it will spill over past their threshold. And this is true for anyone. Any human has a window of tolerance and a threshold of tolerance for how much their nervous system and how frequently it can activate before they become traumatized and get stuck in a state of constant fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or collapse. Okay? So given that it's cumulative, the good news is that we don't have to be perfect. It just has to be like 3 out of 4 times, right? Because if you're accommodating 3 out of 4 times, 4 out of 5 times, you are more often than not bringing down the cumulative activation instead of pushing it up towards their threshold. And this is hard because we have to offset all the accumulation from school, or maybe you have a co-parent who's not on board, etc. But given that we know it's over time and cumulative, then we can really get into the ratios and doing the best we can, right? And also giving ourselves permission. Sometimes we do have to set boundaries, but if we really focus on preventing violence against a sibling, or not destroying things, and really lower the demands and be flexible with the boundaries elsewhere, overall, they're going to develop a window of tolerance over time. Okay? So the goal, the 3 things we're working towards in the paradigm shift of what I teach, which is shifting the way we understand our children and behavior into a logic that supports your child over the long term. There are 3 things that we're doing based on this logic. 1, over time and in accumulation, we're trying to create a window of tolerance. Okay, so what that means is there's still PDA, and they're still going to activate and go into their survival brain when they perceive a loss of autonomy. But they're not going to immediately tip past their threshold constantly like they would in burnout. The second thing that we're trying to do with this choice point, activating or accommodating over time and in accumulation, is creating an overall felt safety and trust between you and your child or teen. Okay? Because the more you accommodate and the more you create this subconscious felt safety, the more you're going to get to a place of being able to collaborate and mentor and model. Okay? Because they're going to have a window of tolerance. They're going to have felt safety and trust with you, which doesn't necessarily have to do with how they feel emotionally. It's what their body feels around you on a subconscious level. And 3, the more we practice this, the more we support them to create new neural pathways. They're still going to have their PDA neural pathways, but we're creating options for another neural pathway and not just going into explosive and violent behavior. This takes time, right? We're supporting them over and over to get back into their thinking brain. But sometimes you won't be able to do this. So that's why we have to think of the logic of accommodation and activation in accumulation over time as drops in a bucket, rather than every time has to be perfect, because it won't be. That's not how it operates in a family system or in the quote real world. Even in the most accommodated environment, humans are humans and they have conflicting access needs. So just by interacting with others, there will be activation sometimes, right? So again, we have 3 goals: window of tolerance, developing a sense of felt safety and trust, and 3, helping them as frequently as possible into their thinking brain to create new neural pathways. Okay? What we can rest on as parents and caregivers or therapists, and all of these amazing humans play a role, is that we have the freedom to not be perfect. Okay? We have the freedom to do our best, and as we change the baseline, we are changing the pattern of how much your child is accumulating nervous system stress or decreasing it. Okay, but this takes time, right? It might have taken them a couple years to get where they are. into burnout, it will take time to get them out, and it's the long game. And if we're too black and white about it, it's not going to be sustainable, right? And we want to think of things sequentially. Are they in burnout, and are you completely reestablishing your relationship with them? In which case, we're going to need to be erring on the side of more intensely dropping demands and boundaries and all of that. But a year out, it's going to look different, right? And this is the nuance and why it's hard to communicate on like a tile on Instagram, because it's sequential. So finally, I want to give you guys some grounding in what I mean by not being perfect and give some examples, okay? So I'm going to give you 3 examples, and these are based on like sticking points I had or questions I've gotten from parents. So one example of an equality accommodation, meaning we're deliberately trying to give our child or teen the experience of being equal to or above us. And sometimes it's necessary to deliberately put ourselves below them in a situation in order to like prevent that activation, because that's what sets off the PDA nervous system. So an example of this would be letting them win the game, right? Letting them win a card game, letting them win chutes and ladders, letting them win a basketball game, deliberately missing if you're shooting baskets and letting them win, right? And I know there's like the caveat that some kids perceive this as not, as you doing it on purpose. If that's the case for your kid, ignore what I'm saying. But for a lot of kids, this is very supportive. The question parents always get is, yeah, but what about when there's a sibling? What about when there's other kids, etc.? This is when we have to think in the creative and the nuance. You can do it at home, one-on-one, and not do it when they're outside with friends or with a sibling, right? Because it's cumulative. And this is where the logic is so confusing for people to understand, because the more you do this, the more you let them win with just you, one-on-one, the more you're putting accommodations into the cumulative nervous system activation, the water bottle, and the more it's going to be coming down. They're going to have more of a window, so when they do play with the sibling or the friend, they can activate without completely like melting down and destroying the chutes and ladders or throwing the basketball. This takes time. It's not going to be immediate. It's over time, and it's a cumulative. Second, diffusing, equalizing. So what do I mean by that? Equalizing is the behavioral expression of the disability when the child is not feeling felt safety, perceiving threat. And in order to get back to a place where they feel safe, they're trying to put themselves above the other. So usually the safest person. So controlling what that person says, criticizing, saying they can't sit there, destroying a sibling's things. It looks like manipulation, controlling, and sometimes abusing type behavior. Okay? So equalizing, parents' biggest sticking point and difficulty with this is, well, I can't let them equalize. I can't let them behave like this, call me names or tell me where to sit or where my line of vision can be when they're watching TV or correcting my words, because that's like gonna set up a dynamic where they're abusive and where like the sibling is abused. So this is where we need to not think in black and white thinking. We can find the middle way, which is my boundary is my PDA son cannot harm physically, emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually anyone else in the home. However, I allow him to equalize against me and I diffuse it because it doesn't harm me. I know the logic of his disability. I can hold that. I can understand it's just data. It's not personal. It's not about me. It's just a reflection of his nervous system. I have the tools to de-escalate. Okay? It doesn't harm me. I don't like it. I've had to do a lot of work around, what's mine and what's his and what's data and what's emotion and all that. I have a different approach with the sibling who's 5 because he can't hold that. he is not responsible for accommodating the behavior. Okay, so you can do both, and it's not, if you de-escalate or diffuse equalizing, then you never set boundaries. It's in accumulation. So all the times I'm allowing him to equalize against me and diffusing, I'm helping him create a window of tolerance, and I'm strengthening the neural pathway back to the thinking brain, And that's where we can actually learn, connect, and where I can model for him the behavior I want to instill. Finally, another example is when children lie or argue with you about things that aren't true, right? And one of the hardest things for parents is like, what do you do in that situation? I need to correct them. I need to teach them. They can't tell lies. If we see it as simply data, neutral, and perhaps even with compassion, understanding that like maybe they're perceiving things different than we are. And that's often true with neurodivergent kids. So we have to get out of the black and white thinking of like, if there's ever a time I don't correct them, then they're going to learn that they can lie. They're not learning in the survival brain. Okay? They can't learn. It's not what's happening. It's the antelope on the savannah running from the lion when they're in their survival brain. So let me give you an example of how I do things differently. 2 examples. 1, we're talking about the color of my son's eyes. He says, my eyes are green in the summer. It's not objectively true from my perception. What I used to do is I would say, well, I think your eyes are always blue. That's how, maybe if you're near a body of water and it reflects, they look a little bit more green. But correcting him would activate the nervous system and just put a drop in his bucket to go towards his threshold, right? So I just agree with him in that situation. I don't teach or correct him, and that puts him back in the thinking brain. Another example, I spent the night at Granny's when you were in the hospital, when you were in labor with William. That's not true, right? But if we correct, it's going to activate the nervous system, put him into his survival brain. And this did happen with his grandmother correcting, and then it just turned into a power struggle. Okay? So we don't have to correct that in the moment. We don't have to, and we can choose to accommodate. It might be different. I might make a different decision if I watch him hit his brother and then he comes to me and says, I didn't hit William, right? So this is nuanced. There's decision making here. It's not a free-for-all, which is how it's often portrayed by people who disagree with a non-behavioral approach to parenting. But my perception is that what we're doing here is not just parenting, it's caregiving for a nervous system disability. So just to remind you that this is over the long term in accumulation, and it takes time and practice. Okay, this is not like a natural thing for us to do because all of our conditioning is in a different paradigm. So one of the main tools we can use to support ourselves to practice a different way is what I call cost-benefit decision-making within constraints. So this is a skill that I teach in the Paradigm Shift program. We spend 3 full weeks practicing this, and actually we practice it the whole program. But it's something that supports you to find this middle way within the constraints that we all face, which is just a fact. Our child is we're either activating or accommodating our child. That's the choice, right? So if you are someone who wants to go deeper, who wants to work within a group of like-minded families who are actually taking action to change their behavior in order to be the catalyst for all change in their family positively, I want to invite you to learn more about the Paradigm Shift program. Our next cohort will begin on September 4th, and enrollment begins a month prior on August 5th. So if you are interested, please comment PSP below and we will get you the link. All right, my friends, I'll see you soon. Bye.